The goats are gone. The chickens are all gone. The ducks are gone. And Ed is gone. 5 of our baby chicks are gone, and all that remains are these 5 Dorkings and 1 coach in. So what happened? Well, I'm going to tell you about the big mistakes that we made on our urban homestead when it comes to livestock. So for those of you who are new to the channel, we live on a small 1-acre lot where the majority of our property is in the front of our house. We basically have no backyard. And about 2 years ago, we decided to start homesteading on this property. We started off in 2016 by getting 7 laying hens, 2 of which died. Those went really well, and we decided that we were going to expand our efforts to become more self-sustainable by getting goats. So in March of 2017, we got the minimum amount of goats that we could get, which was 2. We got 2 Nubians, 1 2-year-old milking doe, and then 1 3-month-old baby. And then because we had a market for rainbow eggs, we decided to get a few more rainbow layers, chickens. And because we also wanted to have provide our own meat for at least these chickens, we decided to get into a dual-purpose heritage breed called the Dorking. We also like duck eggs, so we got the bare minimum in ducks. We got 1 male, 1 female. This would provide us with duck eggs, but also allow us to expand by breeding at some point in the future, but not on this property. And because our property is so small, we can't really have any sort of livestock guardian animal here, at least as far as dogs or llamas or donkeys or anything like that. But what we could do was a goose. And so we decided to go with a tufted Roman goose, which we hoped would help protect or at least notify us when there was any kind of predator attack such as hawks. So we thought we were doing everything right. We thought we were kind of keeping things fairly small with where we wanted to go with it and doing what we could here. 1 acre is certainly enough property to sustain that amount of birds and the goats, but we made some mistakes along the way. The very first mistake we made, and this was the biggest one, was the very same day that we put out our video on why we can't move. We were approached by a neighbor who told us that we were in violation of a local covenants and neighborhood covenants saying that we could not have goats on our property. Now, those of you guys that watched our video on where we brought home our goats, the very first thing I mentioned is how we did our research. When we bought this house, we did our research on whether or not we were allowed to have animals on the property. And then we did it again before we got chickens, and we did it again before we got goats. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you what we did right, and then I'll tell you what we did wrong. What we did right is we checked the county for the county zoning laws. We checked the town for the town zoning laws and any rules and regulations around that. We checked our deed for our house to make sure that there was nothing written in there saying that we couldn't have any livestock on the property. We also went to our neighbors and casually mentioned that we were thinking about getting chickens, thinking about getting goats, not really asking permission, but just sort of feeling them out, and there was no objections at the time. And we also looked around at the properties around us, and we have a guy that has several goats up on the corner, a couple properties that have horses back here, a guy that's breeding dogs over there, and we have people that have chickens all over. So what went wrong? Well, it turns out that our neighbor, who was upset over the noise that our goat was making and the fact that there are chickens free-ranging, found a covenants written back in 1971 that when this whole property used to be dairyland, and it was sold to be developed as lots for properties, residential properties. And a covenants was written to kind of just sort of keep up the neighborhood, basically stating the types of materials that houses could be built out of, and also what kind of livestock was allowed on the property. And in this document it says that as far as 4-legged animals, the only 4-legged animals that were allowed were household pets, with the exception of several lots in the neighborhood which were allowed to have certain types of pets such as horses and whatnot. Our lot was not one of them. In addition, the guy that has goats up in the corner isn't part of this neighborhood, and so that kind of excluded him from this covenants as well. Now this covenants is one that's, it's not an HOA or anything like that, but It's one written back in 1971 that renews every 10 years, and it basically is a majority rules covenant. So when we moved in here 10 years ago, which even if we knew about this covenants, we were the only people on the street other than the guy up on the corner, and that guy couldn't care less what we did, and we couldn't care less what he did. But since then, over the last 3 years, this area has become highly developed. There have been 6 brand new houses built that were $500,000 homes, and there are 4 being built as we speak. It has become very developed, and the stereotype, the people moving in are not the homesteading type. Not the type to appreciate livestock, and certainly we were called out on the fact that we were depreciating the value of our neighbor's home by having livestock. So another thing to mention is that when we moved here 10 years ago, we weren't on the homesteading path. We didn't buy this property to homestead on. I know there's a lot of misconceptions about that in our video on why we can't move, why we didn't buy up the property around us, or why we didn't think of that when we bought the house. We weren't planning on homesteading. We just decided to start homesteading 2 years ago. So just keep that in mind as I go through all of the mistakes that we made. So the very first mistake that we made, obviously, is not doing our due diligence and researching everything thoroughly. We thought we did, but there apparently was a blanket statement in our deed that just says that our property is under any covenances that are filed in our county. We didn't actually go to our county to research if there was anything on file. Turns out there was. Our bad. And this particular covenant is basically just a majority rules covenant. And 10 years ago, even if we were homesteading, we were basically the majority. So it wouldn't have been an issue. But now we are no longer the majority. And like I said, the houses that have come up around here are not the type of houses that appreciate homesteading or livestock. So the second mistake that I made was in choosing the wrong goat. I think ultimately this was probably our biggest downfall, other than not doing our research thoroughly. Now there are loud breeds of goats, and there are quiet breeds of goats. And then there are just loud goats, and there are just quiet goats as far as personality. We picked the loudest breed, and we probably picked one of the loudest goats of that breed. And when she got in a mood, when she was in heat, when she was hungry, she let everybody know it. And she was very vocal. And I really can't blame a lot of people for not really... And I really can't blame a lot of people for not appreciating the sounds of the farm, especially a screaming goat. You can equate it to a dog that's barking nonstop for 2 hours. So I really can't blame people for that. But certainly our second mistake would be in choosing a very loud goat. The third mistake we made was in not being inconspicuous. As I mentioned earlier, the majority of our property is in our front yard. And because we really wanted to do well by our birds, by pasture raising them, by moving them around as much as possible so they had fresh grass and fresh bugs, that meant moving around 164-foot electric fence in our front yard throughout the year. That's not exactly inconspicuous. They call backyard chickens for a reason. We were kind of flaunting the fact that we have chickens. So putting them in our front yard when they should have been in our backyard, even though we really don't have a backyard, was probably our second mistake. And then also when we decided to free range our birds, I think that pretty much was the icing on the cake. Even though the birds stayed on our property, it was actually, the day that we did that as well, that we were approached about being in violation of a covenant. The fourth mistake we made was in putting up permanent structures. We knew when we got into homesteading that we were only going to be able to do so much here on this property, and that we were eventually going to move. When you start putting up permanent structures, you start investing a lot of money into whatever livestock it is you're getting. So for us, it was goats, and we put a lot of money. I think it was like $800 into fencing, and then not to mention the shed and everything else for the goats. And if you're going to get into something like livestock, you're putting in permanent structures, you need to make sure that the cost of those structures are going to amortize over the course of many years in order to pay that off. So you need to spread the cost of that investment over multiple years, which means you need to be on that property for multiple years in order to make your money back. We basically lost a lot of money by only using this fence and the shed for only 4 months, I believe it was. And as far as doing this again and getting goats wherever we move to next, it's going to be another huge chunk of money to put up fencing, and I don't know if we're going to be able to afford it for a very long time. So that would be mistake number 4. So the 5th mistake that we made was in getting ducks and a goose and not having a pond. Now, we did our research, and a lot of people say with khaki Campbells, they don't need a pond, and with goose, they really don't need a pond, and several other breeds of geese, they really don't need a pond. I can tell you after having them for several months that they really do need a pond. It's almost essential to their being. And even though we got them a small kiddie pool, it just really wasn't enough. We could just tell that when we filled up that pool, they sat in it and played in it all day. As soon as it got dirty, they didn't want to play in it anymore. And let me tell you, after a couple hours, that thing stank, and it needed emptied every single day and refilled every single day. They really, really enjoyed it, but it wasn't deep enough for them to dive. They're trying to clean their heads, clean their faces, and it just really wasn't enough. So, in my personal opinion, after having ducks and a goose, I would never get them again without having a pond. Number 6, which kind of falls right along with number 5, is keeping ducks and a goose together with chickens. I would never do that again. Ducks and geese are very, very messy. Ducks and geese will take food in their mouth and they kind of backwash in the water. They need that water to swallow their food. So if you have a bunch of bowls out for chickens and for ducks and for your goose, those bowls are going to get full of food and just get filthy within a few minutes. And then you have your chickens that are eating and are drinking that water. And even if you put up poultry nipples, like if you put up a bucket of poultry nipples, the ducks don't use that. And the chickens are always going to go for fresh water on the ground rather than using a poultry nipple. And the reason that the ducks can't or won't use it is because they need to clean their nostrils. They have to dip their head into water. So really having poultry nipples when you have chickens, ducks, and a goose are not going to work because chickens won't use them. They're going to go for the bowl, and the ducks need the bowl, and then you have everyone just drinking dirty water all the time. So, and the other part of that is with the coop space. When you keep the ducks and the goose with the chickens poop on the ground, and then the ducks and the goose, which can't fly up on a roost, will actually sit in it and just get filthy. And then if you have any kind of ramp like we do for our coop, ducks and geese, because of their webbed feet, it's very awkward. It's really hard for them to walk up any kind of ramps. So it was always a challenge for these ducks and the goose to get up into the chicken coop. They really need to be on a place on the ground and really have their own space. Number 7. I'm going to have a lot of people that disagree with me on this one, but this is my own personal opinion. Mobile coops suck. I hate mobile coops. They're too small, too constrained. They're unsanitary for the birds. Even with tons of ventilation, they just stink. They're crowded. They're hot. Again, even with extra ventilation, they're just really, really hard to move. Even though, we did kind of our version of a chickshaw, which is not the original version, and I'm not knocking that design because we have our own design and we never did try the original design. But just pulling it around the yard is virtually impossible, at least in particular with our type of yard. I think possibly on a flatter area it would be a lot easier, but because ours has a whole bunch of erosion in it and a lot of rocks and tree stumps, it's just really hard pulling it. And even with our original coop design that we built, which was a semi-mobile coop, some of you guys may have seen where I bent the wheels. I'll leave a link to that video. We've always had trouble just moving coops around. I would never build or use another mobile coop again unless it were on a tractor bed. So that's just my opinion and my mistake that I would never do again. Number 9 was in trying to go to market on a small property. In particular, and this particular property in this particular area. There are a lot of people that go to market with their products on 1 acre of land. They do really well, whether they're raising meat birds or they're raising eggs. But on this particular property, with the type of neighborhood that it is, it was a bad idea. We kind of expanded into market with trying to get into selling rainbow eggs, and it was just too big for this property. It was too noticeable. It goes back to being inconspicuous, and we were not inconspicuous by having more birds on this property. So my advice to anyone who's on an urban homestead is keep it small and grow things or do things for yourself. Don't try and go to market with things until you, at least for many years, until you really get a good feel for your neighborhood and whether or not people are going to be okay with it. Because even if you have all your covenants in line and your laws in line, and you're allowed to have, you know, say chickens, for example, as many as you want on your property, there's no limitations to it, you could eventually tick off some neighbors with the smell or just with the noise or who knows what. And honestly, guys, it doesn't take much for a group of neighbors who are ticked off to get together and write up a petition and create some sort of law to get you kicked off your property or to get you to get your animals removed. And that kind of leads me to my last one, which is number 9, which is being in the right community for doing what you want to do. This particular community is not one that appreciates the homesteading lifestyle. And if you are going to be homesteading, my biggest mistake wasn't thinking that people were going to mind their own business and leave us to do our own thing while they did their own thing. But when our noises started encroaching upon others' rights, then that's where the line got crossed. And people who are in the homesteading path, they're not going to really notice that or really care. But people who do care about those things, who do care about the value of their home and upkeeping that, and who do care about how nice their yard looks and what they're looking at when they look across their property at your place, whether they see chickens, if they don't like that, that's where you can run into trouble. So just keep in mind that if you are in a like-minded community, you're going to be better off doing the homesteading things that you do. So all this leads me back to getting rid of animals. As I showed you in the beginning, we got rid of everything except for 5 hens and 1 rooster. We weren't forced to get rid of our animals, but we also don't want to cause any trouble for ourselves or for others. And so the very first reason we decided to downsize and get rid of the animals is because for that reason. We just don't really want to cause any trouble or have any trouble caused for us. The second reason we got rid of all our animals is because we are no longer going to stay here. I don't know what we're going to do or how we're going to do it, but we are moving. We are no longer going to stay in an area that doesn't allow us to live the lifestyle that we want to live, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to pull that off. This whole last week we've been very busy staging our home for sale and also looking at other properties. We actually put in an offer on a property. Unfortunately, that particular offer fell through. It would have been an awesome farm to work. But we'll continue to look. So when you have your house for sale, when you are selling, this is another thing to probably keep in mind if you are urban homesteading, and that is that in particular if you're urban homesteading on a property that is, or in an area that doesn't have like-minded people, then they're not going to appreciate the goats and the chickens when you're trying to sell your house. It's going to be a deterrent from purchasing your home. So in order to get the highest value for your home, you need to make it you need to make it appeal to buyers. And so that was the other reason that we got rid of our animals. And then the third reason is for timing and infrastructure. When you close on a house and move into another house, there is a very quick turnover time there, where you need to have infrastructure already set up in order to move your livestock over to that place, have everything all set up. If you don't have infrastructure set up, such as the property we originally bid on, you need to figure out a solution, some home for your animals until you can get that set up. And that can be very uncomfortable. So it can also be a hindrance when you're trying to look for property and where your animals can possibly limit you as to what properties you can get because you have to worry about getting infrastructure set up, or at least have it already set up. So because of the timing and the infrastructure, that is the third reason that we got rid of all of our animals. Again, all except for 6, because we feel that they are very small. It's going to take them a little while until they get up to full size. They're going to be fairly quiet for a long time. Right now there are no rules stating that we can't have chickens. It's just relates to four-legged animals, so we don't think we're in violation of that, but we're going to keep it low and quiet by just having these 6 birds. And hopefully we'll find a nice property here within the next couple months, so that's our big news. Again, I'm very humbled to make this video. I can say that I'm definitely not very happy about the situation that I put us in. And these are the consequences for me doing what I did. And I really hope that by putting this video out there that it really helps others that may be going down this path so they're not caught in the same situation. Because I can tell you, it's not easy to get rid of your animals at all. So, but when one door closes, another door tends to open. So instead of looking at this negatively, we're trying to look at it as we have to take a few steps back to punt, as Jeremy likes to say. So we are taking a few steps back with our livestock in order to go full force somewhere else where we will be able to hopefully flourish and do what we want to do on another property. So please wish us the best of luck in finding something, because we're going to need it. And I hope this has been helpful to you guys. If you guys have any tips or tricks for homesteading on an urban lot, or if you guys have any mistakes that you've made, please leave those down below. I'm hoping that people will come here and read all these comments and learn from these mistakes. And if you guys like this kind of stuff, like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.